So what's the bad news out of Afghanistan these days?
Well, the bad news is that the security situation is steadily deteriorating, despite, and some would say because of, the very large military presence from the United States and other countries. The armed conflict is worse than it was before. The number of civilian casualties is increasing. Last year it was more than 3,000. It's the fifth year in a row in which civilian casualties have increased. The number of Taliban insurgents is continuing to grow. I was there just a few months ago. We were told that the number of armed militants is somewhere between 25 and 30,000, and that number has gone up. Despite the fact that we claim to be killing many of these insurgents, we've had our forces there 10 years, and yet the armed insurgency is stronger than ever. It indicates that a military solution to this conflict can never work, and that we need to demilitarize and reduce our presence militarily.
In fact, our presence there was cited by the people themselves as the number one cause of their joining the Taliban.
Yeah, there have been a number of studies that have looked at the factors that are driving the insurgency. What causes people to take this extreme act, to take up arms, to plant bombs in the roads? And when you ask the insurgents, well, some of them do it for money and the like, but many are motivated by a desire to drive out foreign forces, to rid their country of what they see as an occupying force. I call this the occupation effect. Whenever a foreign military force comes into a country, into a community, there's a tendency for people to resist, and often they take up arms. We've seen this all over the world. We saw it in Iraq, and unfortunately we found ourselves in that position in Afghanistan as well, where we are seen by a significant portion of the population as an occupying power, and people take up arms against us.
Okay, so what's the $1 trillion or $2 trillion question here? How do we get out of Afghanistan in a way that's as morally defensible as possible, I guess?
The subtitle of my book is, Responsible Military Withdrawal. We need to withdraw.
What's the title of your book? Well, we've got you here.
Ending Obama's War, Responsible Military Withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the challenge is to demilitarize in a way that doesn't destabilize, that doesn't create a huge security vacuum that works to the advantage of the insurgents and the militants. And I think we can do that by a gradual process. We need to focus on a political solution. It's good that we're starting some kind of a dialogue and negotiation process, but it needs to have much greater priority. I would want our government to put all of these players together, the insurgent groups, representatives of the Pakistani government and military, the Kabul government of Karzai, and of course our own representation, to work out a solution.
Would you include the Iranians in this discussion as well?
Well, we need to have a parallel diplomatic strategy where we work with the neighboring states. And yes, Iran is a crucial player. They were our allies in 2001 when we drove out the Taliban. They share our interest in assuring that the Taliban does not come back into power. So we should be able to work together with them. India has a huge role in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it's not always helpful in the sense that they're working against the Pakistanis, that animosity and conflictual relationship between India and Pakistan is being played out in Afghanistan. But we need to work with them and encourage them and facilitate a cooperative effort. China, other states in the region, all can play a role. And very importantly, we need to sustain the economic development funding that has worked. As I mentioned, some of these programs for education, for healthcare, for local community development, these are successful. They're working. They're based on development funding that the U.S., and European, and Japanese, and Australian, and other donor states have provided. That needs to continue. Even as we draw down the military, let's sustain and keep the development funding at a high level so that we can address those long-term conditions that lead to insurgency and armed violence.
Now, are we going to have time for a gradualist approach now that Leon Panetta has already pretty much put a spot on a pinprick on the calendar mid-2013 as a drawdown for American forces?
Well, the actual calendar is to turn over security to the Afghans by 2014.
2014.
And for us to end our combat role in 2013. And I think that's a good step. In fact, I would make the end of our combat operations a major form of leverage for the negotiations. So why don't we, for example, offer to suspend all military operations, these house raids and the drone strikes and bombings and other military raids. Let's suspend all of that as a good faith gesture to the insurgent forces to kind of jumpstart a negotiation process. But over the long term, our current plan is to keep some troops in Afghanistan for a considerable amount of time. And I have no problem with that, provided we're on a trajectory going down towards zero. And that way we can use the pace of our disengagement as a form of leverage. The insurgents want us to go. The Afghan government wants us to stay. Ultimately, we are leaving, but we can kind of adjust that pace to exert leverage on both sides, because insurgents want to win. They're not going to win militarily. The Afghan government likes to be receiving all of this huge amount of aid and military protection from the United States, but that's not going to continue forever. So as we pull back from our commitments, we can use the process as leverage to encourage the parties to work together and reach that political solution that ultimately is going to be the answer.
Generally, what would you say, you're optimistic or pessimistic about us being able to pull this off?
Right. I'm generally pessimistic. It requires a degree of sophistication and political maturity on the part of the U.S. and our ability to work with other partners. There's so many spoilers involved, that's the problem. Pakistani military has been spoiling any peace talks to which they are not a party. The Indians don't want to see a political solution that helps the insurgents or the Pakistanis. So you've got a lot of problems here. We don't seem to want to work with the Iranians on anything, even when we have a self-interest like we do here in Afghanistan. So it takes a lot of faith to believe that a solution is possible. But the first step is to try to outline the components. I'm not saying we have the plan, but I think we have identified what are the elements. And now they need to be all put together and juggled and worked with the parties in the region, in the countries, and hopefully some kind of solution could be reached.
Okay, great. We've been talking with David Cortright from the Kroc Institute of Notre Dame. I'm Kevin Clark, Associate Editor for America Magazine. Take care, and thanks for being with us, David.
Thank you.